I am so pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Delmar Gillus, who will be speaking about equitable access to energy efficiency and electrification for marginalized communities. Delmar Gillus is the Chief Operating Officer of Elevate, responsible for operational workforce development and project management in Elevate's portfolio of clean energy projects. Gillus works to increase contractor diversity, deliver workforce development programs, create opportunities for diverse contractors in community solar programs, and ensure smart grid programs are accessible to all Illinois utility customers. He played a critical role in passing Illinois' Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, working to ensure the legislation centered equity and created project opportunities and jobs in underserved environmental justice communities. He is active in boards and advisory councils such as the Illinois Future of Work Task Force, the Building Performance Association, and the Illinois Environmental Council. Outside of work, he volunteers with the Chicagoland National Society of Black Engineers alumni chapter, mentoring young engineers in pre-college initiative programs. Please feel free to add your questions for Delmar Gillus into the chat. And without further ado, welcome, Delmar.
Well, thank you very much, Annika. It is a great honor and a pleasure to be the keynote speaker for this year's R2E2 Summit. I'd like to start off first and foremost by thanking ACEEE and the other sponsors for hosting this great event. But I especially want to thank Annika and Carolyn and Nick, who are doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to help corral the speakers like myself and assist us in getting ready for the next 2 days. So thank you to all of you for your support and help. As I was thinking about preparing for this conference, there were a lot of things that were kind of going through my head. As many of you know, I spend a lot of time working in the equity space. And as I was thinking about my remarks, one of the things that was really important to me was to connect the dots between the equity work that I've been doing and the conference. And the good news is this: as I was looking through the agendas of speakers and panels and events, every speaker, every panel, every event is focused on centering equity, is focused on inclusion. So I'm just going to give kind of a high level of some of the equity topics that are really important to me and that I'm passionate about. But I really encourage all of you, if you can find the time, to really dig into the agenda and really try to pick out hopefully all of the events. But if you can't make all of them, pick out the ones that really resonate with you, because there's a really great slate of speakers and panels. Before I dive into equity, though, I think it's really important to kind of think about and talk about the ecosystem that we're currently working in. If you think back pre-COVID, the clean energy economy was growing at roughly 5 times the rate of the rest of the economy. There were jobs being created, there was funding available, and overall there was a focus on we need to start wrangling with this climate challenge that's before us. But unfortunately with COVID, which was an extreme challenge that disproportionately impacted communities of color, a lot of the progress toward our climate goals slowed, and rightfully so. One of the things that I was really passionate about was to refocus on communities during that time. So I personally want to thank all of you and your organizations that did things like bring people water and ensure people had affordable housing and access to healthcare during that very tragic time. Every little bit helped, and through the grace of God, we were able to kind of get through the majority of the pandemic. And now what we're starting to see is that things are starting to pick up again. We're starting to see that level of investment return. We're starting to see more programs and projects and legislation moving forward. And my hope and what I'm seeing is that we're going to return to that period where we were seeing growth in the clean energy space at 5 times the rate of the rest of the economy. But the news is not all good in that space. When you start looking at the commitments that were made as part of the Paris Climate Agreement, many of the countries aren't meeting the commitments and the obligations that they committed to. So what does that mean as we work toward our climate goals? On the equity side, we're seeing a lot of familiar patterns where 10% of the clean energy workers are diverse workers. We're seeing other patterns like 5% of the contractors are diverse or people of color. When you start to really break that down, when you look at Indigenous women, Black women, Latina women, the numbers are even more scary. You start seeing numbers in the 1% range. So the question that I have around that is this okay? Is this the pattern that we want to continue to follow? But the good news to me, and I'm very much an optimist, so I like to see the positive side of things, is that we all are in the right place at the right time, having the right conversation. And this conference is an example of that. Right now, even as we speak, federal funding through the Infrastructure Reduction Act and through the infrastructure bill are moving. I'm sorry, I got my bills wrong. The infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act are actively being implemented, and we're trying to figure out how to utilize that money. States like Illinois have implemented the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is a bill which we affectionately call CEJA, that is centered on equity and really focuses on how do you include marginalized communities in the activities that are taking place at this time. But we have to be careful. One of the things that people that know me well often hear me say is that we all breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and we share the same energy resources. So if we address climate change in only affluent communities, my question to everyone is, will we reach our global climate goals? I think the answer to that, at least to me, is no. So as we're looking at these climate challenges, if we're able to implement and do retrofits and energy efficient work in affluent communities, but then the community of marginalized community next to a fossil fuel plant that's putting poison in the water and poison in the air, that pollution blows into the affluent community and the poison water runs downstream the river and is the drinking water for other communities. So unlike things like the internet or cable TV or computers, we can't address these things in affluent communities and then leave other communities to catch up. If we use that strategy, we will not meet our climate goals, and all of us will suffer for that. So the question that I have that I like to talk about, and hopefully we'll have some additional learnings on through the conference, is what do we need to do to create an equitable approach to the clean energy economy, and what do we need to do differently? I want to start where I started before, which is with the bills, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, CEJA. All of these bills are putting billions of dollars into our economy. But what are we doing to make sure that those dollars get the frontline communities? There's programs like Justice 40, and I put a link in the chat, in my good morning hello chat, to a website that touches on that. We need to make sure those dollars get the frontline community so that they have access. What are we doing to work with CBOs in our community? One of the things that we did in CEJA that was critically important is one word. CEJA is based on one word. It's based on the word listen. Oftentimes, we as engineers, and I'm a mechanical engineer by training, we know what the technical solution is. We know how to retrofit a building. We know how to do electrification work. But are we engaging the community in a discussion on what they need? I often share a story, and I even have this discussion with my wife around induction stoves. If we don't do a good job of doing outreach and communicating and engaging on this new technology, it may not be accepted. Many communities and many cultures are very used to that gas flame. And when you take that away and replace it with something electric, they're like, oh, that's not going to work. How are we engaging in these conversations around induction stoves, around heat pumps, around waterless water heaters? We have to have these discussions at the community level. What are we doing related to workforce development? You can look back to multiple federal initiatives where the approach was this. It's like, there's a lot of money, we'll carve out a percentage for Black and brown communities, we'll train people, give them a training certificate, and then wish them well. And many of those folks remain underemployed without access to whatever new technology or new process we were trying to work toward. And in a state of the government did it to us again, where they got our hopes up, they trained us, and then when we went to get jobs, there were no opportunities. So one of the questions I'm working hard to answer, and hopefully we answered some of it with CEJA, is how do we create jobs instead of training certificates? For Black and brown contractors that, remember, I mentioned Black women, 1%, Latinas women, 1%, Indigenous women, 1-2%. How do we get those numbers up? We have to assist people in getting access to projects. And that ties into some of the points that I think are critically important around as we write legislation, as we work on bills, is we focus our efforts on making sure that the incentives are right, that the reporting is transparent, and that we work toward the word that I mentioned, which is listen. How we build these programs is as important as if, or even more important than the technology. So in closing, there's a couple of things that I hope we all take away from this conference. One is that we don't have to figure this stuff out on our own. Many of the speakers, many of the sessions, if you go through the agenda, there are experts that are talking about how to do this. The second thing that's important is making sure that these dollars that are cascading down from the federal government, from philanthropy, from private, are able to connect up with our communities and our CBOs. And the third thing to me that's most important is around relationship. Like I said, we have the technical expertise. We know what needs to be done. But how are we engaging? How are we listening? Because here's what's also interesting. If a business engages with a diverse contractor, not only does that contractor benefit, but I guarantee you that that business will get access to an untapped marketplace in the community from which that diverse contractor came from. So there are mutually beneficial reasons for us to work together, to collaborate, and to partner. So once again, as I leave you all, I just want to once again have a call to action that as you're thinking about your programs, ask yourself the question, how are we addressing equity in this program? Ask yourself the question, have you engaged a local community group as we're looking to retrofit their building or their home or their community? Ask yourself the question, are we able to meet our global climate goals if we don't include everybody? And what are the benefits of having an inclusive, all hands, everyone's in approach to addressing our climate needs? Once again, I want to say thank you to ACEEE for this great opportunity to share some thoughts around equity. And I'd just like to end by saying thank you to all of you. I look forward to answering your questions either live or in the chat. And if there's anything that I can do to assist, I'm very happy to both learn from you, to share what I know, but most importantly, to listen. Thank you and have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Delmar. I love that focus on asking questions that you haven't asked before and on listening. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to ask you one question. And then thank you for that offer to answer additional questions in the chat. Folks, feel free to add questions there for Delmar and he'll work through them as he has the chance. I'm wondering what advice you would give to state and local governments or to CBOs on how to engage to ensure they really do build an authentic and equitable partnership. You know, beyond listening, what practical advice is there, or what common mistakes and stumbling blocks do you see happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest thing, and once again, it is tied to that kind of listen concept, is that programs get built and developed without the contribution and input of CBOs. Many of the things that need to be done technically, oh, we've done technology, we understand it. Oh, we've done training before, we don't need help. And I don't think there's any malicious intent around that. But what tends to happen that many people miss out on is that they don't get the level of buy-in that they need. So if I were to give some just high-level bullets of things to do, is first and foremost, engage, and as part of that engagement process, to listen. The second part is to design your solutions with the community-based organizations at the table, so you're getting input into the process, not input after it's completed. Utilize community resources. There's a lot of great trainers and Black and brown businesses that would love to have an opportunity to work on clean energy projects. And then, as I mentioned in my remarks, build your incentives around a drive toward the climate goal and the equity goal, and then have transparent reporting so that we all can see how you're doing. And to use that reporting not to chastise, but if someone isn't meeting the goals, to figure out ways that we can help and uplift. So that would be what I would definitely recommend, is to build collaborations, teams, and groups that include the people that will be most impacted by the work, so that we can then have holistic solutions that are community-centric. But great question.
Thanks so much, Delmar. I think you really set us up for the rest of the conversations we're going to be having today and tomorrow, and touched on a bunch of the themes that we're hoping to highlight around really building programs that achieve multiple benefits and that are driven by community priorities. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you. And as I said, I'm looking forward to kind of digging into the chat, and just want to wish everyone a great summit. And if I can do anything to help along the way, I'm definitely happy to do that. Thanks again, Annika.